What's up? Welcome to Journey in Yourself and to Self. I'm your host, Sarah. Tonight, our topic will be religion and spirituality as a weapon and tool for manipulation in relationships. And you've heard me talk about relationships in the past, and I point out how relationships ideally would function as a mirror or a window into one's self to help us to understand our own selves by being an observation of ourselves as we interact with our relationship partner, with our women, with our man. And I've pointed out how it is when we're in a relationship, we will invariably attract to us someone who will bring out our weaknesses, our challenges. They will come in the form of what we might consider to be triggers. You know, we will notice ourselves being triggered into some type of negative emotion, and that brings the opportunity for self-exploration, or should bring forth as the opportunity for self-exploration for us to be able to understand where that is coming from. Often we embark on a path to get into a relationship under the illusion that by so doing we will find happiness. And as you would know if you listened to my shows in the past, that happiness is not something that can be attained from outside of oneself. Okay, that's why we titled the show Journey into Self, so that we can understand that our job here during this incarnation is for us to go within ourselves, to understand ourselves, and to pull back the layers of illusion that separate us from our connection with divinity. But that having been said, we have not been taught that, so we search outside of ourselves in search of finding happiness, and one of the primary pursuits is that of a relationship. Now, relationships, because of our motivation to find happiness, becomes an attachment. We become attached to the feelings of euphoria from being told that we are loved, by the sensory experiences that we have, the emotional connections that we get, the temporary feelings of happiness, which are unfortunately unsustainable, because, as I pointed out, happiness cannot come from outside of ourselves. So we will receive some type of temporary pleasure or happiness from that. And we will crave that, and will continuously want and seek that. But what happens is that when someone develops an attachment to something, it compels one to become anxious about the possibility of losing it. And that's where you start to see the manifestations of jealousy, fear, and anxiety of the potential of losing that person who had brought forth happiness, or perceiving that someone's taking them away, or feeling that they might be cheating on us. And with attachments, when they take hold that way and result in runaway thoughts, which ends up leading to the negative emotions that I just described, which are primarily rooted in fear. And so attachments end up leading to fear, and then fear leads to all those other emotions. The other thing that fear invokes is because of all the anxieties that it creates on top of the fear, then there is a desire to then want to be able to control the other person. Okay, and so in a desire to be able to find something to be able to use as a tool for manipulation and control, we've found that religion and or spirituality have been used and continue to be used in that capacity. And in that one, both religion and spirituality as a tool is very powerful. It's said in the Christian parlance that, I think it is a quote from a scripture in the Bible. I can't point to the particular quote, but it says that my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. And with respect to the Christian church in particular, which has a strong foothold in for all of our time here in our experience in North America, at least under the auspices of the United States of America, because we also know that we were here long before that entity was constructed here in this realm, that within the Black church, if you will, there isn't a lot of reading of the scriptures. And so what people think that they know of the scriptures is based upon not actual reading of the scriptural material, but rather having it been communicated to them, ideally, by the pastor, who may or may not actually read it himself. And I say that because I had debates with ministers who I could tell did not have even as strong a grasp of knowledge of the Bible as I did, and I would not consider myself to be someone who was a scholar on the Bible to the extent that I could quote scriptures like that. but I've been able to successfully debate them over scripture. And so if they're not someone who can be able to make reference to biblical teachings in that way, and they're communicating those things to their congregation, certainly the congregation is not getting accurate information. And that ends up being one of the things that causes the crux of the problem in, with respect to how effective using religion as a tool for manipulation, because there's a lack of knowledge of what those things say. Okay. And as some of you may recall who have listened to the show before, we've had a number of discussions about the role of Black feminism and how it has been used as a Trojan horse vehicle to undermine the Black community by attacking the Black family structure, and in particular the relationships between Black men and Black women. And I've put forth the proposition that there has never been a need for feminism in the Black community, because there's never been a time in the history of our experience here in the entity called the United States of America where Black men have exploited Black women. In fact, a strong case could be made for the opposite, because of the way we've been socialized here in this country. So, despite the fact that within the Christian church, that up until maybe recent times, the figurehead of the church has been a Black male pastor, that the infrastructure and the decision making and the predominant influence that is being held within the Christian church has always been Black women. Yesterday when we were discussing it on Brother Dr. T. Hassan Johnson's show, The Honest Report, some brothers pointed out, and these are brothers who remain participants of or adherents to the Christian religion, and even some who were either current or former pastors have acknowledged this to be the case. When I put forth that question to them, they acknowledged that the primary forces behind the church have always been women. And so the dynamic that is occurring now is that there has been so much manipulation and either anti-male rhetoric being espoused or anti-male behavior that, well, in addition to the anti-male attitudes, rhetoric, and behavior, but it's also been a tool for basically subjugating men and in a sense, really emasculating men to make them subservient to women. And so a brother who we spoke with yesterday made the point that that is the reason that black men are not coming to the church these days, is because they've tired of having that type of rhetoric and attitude expressed towards them, that there's nothing for them to gain from going, but further oppression and manipulation, which ostensibly people have gone there to be able to escape. Okay, so we've talked about in the past how it is and has been that because of the societal forces that we've experienced during our time here, that it has manifested itself in terms of many of black households being led by black women. And the unfortunate reality is that often because of the perception of their experience with that man, and disappointment about the fact that that experience did not lead them to the happiness that they had expected to receive, and the mutual shortcomings that people have experienced, the fact that the household, however, is being headed by a woman whose interpretation of that experience is negative, will then communicate that to her offspring, creating a negative perception of black men by the children and adversely affecting the psyche of the young black male, and adversely affecting the attitudes of the young black female towards men. And so that, as I pointed out, ends up reaching its extension in the church, being run by these very same people who have had those experiences. The difference being, however, that under the authority of the church, if you will, and the lack of accountability, so to speak, in terms of people having knowledge of what the scriptures say, then there's an illusion that these attitudes being expressed in the institution are ordained by God. And so the desire to create subservience in the males ends up being manifesting themselves in the church and becomes quite effective, because if someone is convinced to believe that this is by divine ordinance, then and not only by divine ordinance, that if they do not adhere to the divine ordinance, that they could suffer the unending torture of hellfire, which I'm sure nobody wants to experience. And so, and then even, of course, questioning these things ends up being discouraged based upon the same tenets, that by so questioning these things, one is subjected to the hellfire. Further, the fact that the church now is primarily serving and being led by the black females, then the figurehead pastor will be also compelled to placate those type of attitudes, and will also communicate that type of attitude to the parishioners, including the black men, which is part of the reason why there's such docility in the behavior of black Christian males, because the religion has been weaponized as a means to be able to control men. Now, I've seen that to be the case in my own family, to the extent that there aren't but maybe one male on my mother's side of the family anyway. There's only one male, or maybe two, that I have been able to relate to, because they're docile simps who are essentially subservient to their women, and I can't relate to them because that whole attitude completely disgusts me. And so before I came on this evening, I was led to read from a post of one of my Facebook friends who was a Swami, and one of the things that he posted, and mind you, I'm going to go, is not just in Christianity where we have this problem. And so even those who consider themselves to be spiritual fall under the same paradigm. But just to provide some context about how things should be, the Swami wrote, when a goddess worships her god, then she has attained a level of spiritual growth, and the same applies to a man worshiping his wife as a goddess. Okay. And so this is from someone who is operating from, of course, beyond the constructs of organized religion, if you will, more of a spiritual standpoint. But even spirituality has been weaponized and used as a tool for manipulation and control by espousing spiritual principles that are selective and reflect a high level of imbalance, by exploiting the ignorance, just as I pointed out, the lack of knowledge of those who are who are Christians because of the disinclination to actually read from the scriptures. The same holds true for spirituality, such that people who only have a rudimentary knowledge of spiritual principles can then put themselves forth as spiritualists, spiritual counselors, spiritual life coaches, priests, priestesses, and so on. And can do so plausibly because they have a little bit of knowledge about spiritual principles so that they can impress others with their rhetoric and sound, like we know what they're talking about. Okay, and so what we end up seeing in that realm is basically the same type of dynamic where because of the fact that there has been a lack of balance in terms of the way society has functioned over the, I guess, past millennium, if you would, that, particularly under the, during the term of the Piscean age, that the balance has been tipped on the scales in such a way that there has been no balance between the feminine and the masculine energies, in such a way that the society is operated in a patriarchal type of fashion. And so now we're starting to see the pendulum swing, if you will, or the scales being moved in the other direction. But what is happening, however, is that instead of moving towards a balance, that the scales are being tipped in completely the opposite direction. So there is no balance being sought nor achieved, that is being basically the pendulum swinging in to the polar opposite level, to where it is a inclination to be a female dominated or matriarchal perspective. So balance is moving from, or the imbalance is moving from the patriarchal to the matriarchal, which is out of balance. Right? The goddess Ma'at is symbolized by the scales being balanced, not tilted on one way or the other. So there should be a balance between the masculine and the feminine, and physically and even energetically, right? And so what is happening now is not a movement towards balance. Indeed, it's even creating more imbalance, because instead of the women even seeking to be empowered and manifest the power of the divine feminine, that instead of embracing the strength of the feminine power, that women instead are becoming or adopting basically the patriarchal type of characteristics. They're being basically converted into men and being put forth in given the images of projecting masculine energy and even the physical strength, as we start to see manifested in the media right now. I understand there's supposed to be a She-Hulk in development. Then we continue to see, these images of women dominating men physically. Okay, that's not the strength that will bring forth the balance. It's by drawing on the power of the feminine energy, which will bring forth balance. Okay, so this desire to do so has ended up creating the phenomenon of people identifying themselves as spiritualists, and then using that moniker in order to be able to, just in the same way as we described as the dynamic in the Christian church, using that as a means to be able to manipulate and control others, and unfortunately manipulate and control men. Now that's not to say that this isn't done by both sides, but this has been more prevalent in our community to where the dynamic has been more tilted towards the feminine. Okay, and it's only recently now where men have begun to find a voice to express their angst about this dynamic being the case in our interactions with each other. And, so that's where, you do have the emergence of voices such like Brother Kevin Samuels, who just recently made this transition, and our good brother, Dr. T. Hassan Johnson, and Brother Tommy Curry, who are then providing the opportunity to men to voice their concerns and frustrations, with these dynamics. And so when we spoke yesterday, many of these things were brought to the forefront about how these religion and spirituality are being used as weapons to manipulate and to control men in relationships. Okay. I even had an encounter where someone who was considered herself to be a priestess sought to recruit me as a disciple, and became frustrated with me because I would not subjugate myself to her guidance as a goddess. Right? She wanted me to be basically subservient to her, which of course I was not going for that. But my story was not particularly unique. There have been a number of brothers who have expressed the same type of thing. But for me, one, I guess, being then I'm not the type of dude uh, that would go for that anyway. But also because of my study and knowledge of spiritual principles, that wool cannot be thrown over my eyes and used as a tool of manipulation to me, because I've been well educated in spiritual principles under the guidance of my own spiritual master, who actually happens to be a woman. Okay, and so I was accused of, not recognizing the divine feminine and the acknowledging, the goddess energy and so forth, which is absolutely ridiculous, because my spiritual master is a woman. So, needless to say, those efforts were not successful with me. Okay, but unfortunately, there are a lot of people who aren't as knowledgeable about the different spiritual principles, to where they can, due to their lack of knowledge, can be easy prey for those who will take that type of information and use it as a tool to manipulate and control. And so, during our discussion yesterday, a number of brothers, had expressed that. And so, even I've counseled, brothers who have come to me, even asking me to educate them on spiritual principles, and also express to me what spiritual principles have been presented to them from their relationship partners, or someone who's trying to cultivate a relationship with them, have basically cherry picked certain spiritual principles to be able to use them as tools for manipulation. Okay, and so in the cherry picking is basically something that helps them to be able to facilitate manipulating and controlling, because they can point to actual spiritual principles that do exist. And so it provides an illusion of validity, because those principles are actually true, but it takes them out of context, and then allows them to be able to be distorted, because they're not put in the right and proper context. Okay, so often what happens with people with respect to moving supposedly away from religion, and then often it'll be said that, well, religions were created to exploit people. Religion is controlling, restrictive, and it was meant to as a tool to subjugate, and so on. Which is not true from the aspect of the purpose that religion was created. It is used as a tool for manipulation and control, and has been co-opted for that purpose. But that was not the original purpose of it when it unfolded initially. It ended up being co-opted by those who had the desire to be able to manipulate and control, but that was not the original purpose of it. Okay, and so, and just for context, religion and spirituality are extensions of each other. They're not in conflict. Okay, and when one is able to understand through the study and meditation upon religion and spirituality, one will be able to readily see and identify that they're extensions of each other, because it has always been the case throughout the human experience on this planet that all spiritual thought has and concepts have been taught in 3 different stages, or 3 different levels, if you will. Okay, and so there's the profane, which is the most external aspect of the teachings, and it is very rudimentary and also very disciplinary, in that there are commandments, do's and don'ts. Thou shalt not do this, thou shalt do that, thou should do this, thou should do that. In the Hindu parlance, those would be referred to as yamas and niyamas, do's and don'ts. Okay, so that's consistent, whether it's spiritual or in the realm of so-called religion. Okay, but at the profane or the external level, the discipline is inherent, in that discipline is required to develop a certain level of character and to prevent one from falling into pitfalls, which will lead one into attachments that are hard to be able to pull oneself out of once one falls into the grip of those things. And so that is the reason. So there is a reason for the do's and don'ts, thou shalt and thou shalt nots, right? And so often what happens when people claim to evolve, so to speak, from religion to spirituality, is not that they're evolving, is that they're just seeking an escape from being held accountable to any kind of discipline. And so then for them, spirituality is just a very nebulous thing. There's no structure to it. You just go with the flow. You go with your feelings. There's no guidance. There's no do's and don'ts. It's just what everyone feels. And that's not spirituality, because spirituality does have, like I said, do's and don'ts. Yamas, niyamas. There is disciplines that we have to adhere to, Uh, there are, austerities, where we engage in order to be able to um, develop our strength of character, to develop control over our senses, to gain control, over our thoughts, right? And so there's a certain discipline that's necessary in order to be able to develop one's spiritual growth and maturity. Okay, but that's not what happens with a lot of people who claim that they've evolved into the spirituality. Is just for them an escape from being held accountable to anything, and that's what a lot of times ends up being the primary issue with respect to people's relationships, is lack of accountability, the lack of their ability to be able to look at oneself and to be able to identify their own weaknesses, their own attachments, the things that they have to overcome within themselves in order to be able to come into an alignment with divinity, to be able to reestablish our connection, our lost connection with divinity. And so instead of doing so, then they're not holding themselves accountable to anything, just like described in terms of making a migration away from religion is a means to be able to avoid any kind of accountability. They seek a relationship in order to be able to further avoid taking any kind of accountability for themselves, and empowering themselves by controlling others, by drawing on some spiritual principles and tenets that have been cherry-picked in order to be able to facilitate them being able to use them to control someone who doesn't have the requisite knowledge to be able to know the difference. Okay, and so I've seen a number of people who have fallen prey to that, and black men who have fallen prey to that, and have not had positive experiences in doing having fallen into that, because though these people have been able to express their knowledge of the spiritual principles, they certainly don't adhere to them themselves. Okay, and that's one of the also one of the telltale signs is that from the perspective of manipulation, is that there will be the inclination to encourage the other person to adhere to spiritual principles and hold themselves accountable to that, or to be accountable to the other person. But the person who is putting themselves forth as a god or goddess is not holding themselves accountable to anything. And if taken to task for not adhering to those same principles, they will, find for themselves some type of excuse as to why it actually doesn't apply to them. Right. And so those are some of the things that are, that are red flags. to where, someone's looking to take advantage of someone, using either religion or or spirituality as a weapon or tool, for manipulation and control. Okay. Now, this isn't something that's just pertinent to Christianity. As I pointed out, this also filters off into spirituality. But then, it's not just limited to both of those two dynamics. It also, spills over to any type of religion or spiritual philosophy. And, unfortunately, it is the case that, uniformly, you will find, whether it's a religion or a spiritual philosophy, what I found in my observations is that no matter what it is, that the adherents or the followers are not inclined to educate themselves on those spiritual principles or tenets, which makes them, again, much more vulnerable to being able to be manipulated and controlled. Okay, and so one thing that's important to realize is that even if one is to have a guru, if you will, or a spiritual guide, master, or whatever, that it is not for them to control, and they don't seek to control anyone. Okay. What they're doing is guiding us and giving us what it is that we need in order for us to ascend to a higher level of consciousness. So they're really giving us insight into ourselves. And they make it known that it's ultimately up to us, and it's our choice, whether we follow their guidance or not. And they don't have any personal stake in whether we do it or not. Okay, and so it should be that same approach if one is engaged in a relationship with someone who may put themselves out as some type of a spiritual teacher, that they should be leading by example. They should be not pointing the finger and trying to instruct someone else as to what to do. They should do it and set an example based upon their own experience, and to be able to relate from their own experiences. And it should be manifest in their behavior. They should be able to be at peace. They should not be reactive. They should be introspective. They shouldn't be someone who points fingers at others. They shouldn't be someone who's looking always to find fault or direct people as to what to do. They should not be somebody who's seeking to be able to control and manipulate, because certainly none of those are inherent in any religious or spiritual teachings. because all spiritual and religious objectives is to help us to be able to know ourselves, not to know others, not to control others, but to really engage in a deep exploration and introspection into oneself so that we can attain self-knowledge, which will ultimately manifest in what we refer to as self-realization, which is a true purpose of our lives. So, I hope that you found this to be informative, and I hope that you take this knowledge and meditate on it and let it resonate with you, so that you can discern whether what I've been expressing to you is truth. I think you will find it to be so. And and also let you know that if you are any desire to go into a deeper relationship with yourself, I do spiritual counseling, and I also do relationship counseling from a spiritual perspective, drawing on all the principles that I just talked about, with focus on using the relationship experience as a means to be able to go into a deeper exploration into oneself, and to then be a tool for a deeper union, by having each relationship partner be able to support and encourage each other on that particular journey. So if you are inclined to want to seek some counsel or need of any direction or assistance on your spiritual path, then do reach out to me. You can contact me by going to my website, which is www.sa-ra.org. That's www.sa-ra.org. And you can go to the appointments page, and then just you can set up a free 30-minute introductory session where we can feel each other out and find out if we're the right fit for that. As well, you can reach out to me on Facebook Messenger, but the most effective way is to just go ahead and go to my website and go ahead and make an appointment. So again, I hope that you have found this to be beneficial, and I know you will if you meditate on it. And I thank you for tuning in. And if you've missed part of this or didn't get a chance to listen to it all, then I will record it and put it on YouTube. You can find me on YouTube on my channel, which is under my full spiritual name, Sa Amin Ma'at. So that would be S-A period R-A period Ma'at, M-A-A-T period Ra at gmail.com. And so if you just type in Sa Amin Ma'at Ra, then you will be able to find my YouTube page, and where I will have the recording. But you can also just look out for it on my YouTube page, where I will post a link to the YouTube video. So I thank you for tuning in here in the journey into self, and I'll greet you in the ancient Kemetic words of peace. Hotep. See you next time.